Let me bring in Rory alongside you, Rory. I'm sure this isn't your fifth World Cup, Rory. What expectations do you have for Scotland? Can they make the quarterfinals, the semi-finals, perhaps?
I think probably of all the home nations, Scotland have got the best chance of making a semi-final because they could potentially get Argentina in the quarters, who we would fancy that more than taking on France or any of the bigger Southern Hemisphere nations, I think.
Welcome to the Scottish Rugby Blog podcast 10th anniversary special, where we'll be looking back over the past 10 years of the blog, reminiscing about the highs and lows of Scottish rugby, but knowing us mainly the lows. I'm Cammy Black and I'm joined by co-founders of the blog Al Kerr.
Hello.
And Rory Baldwin.
Hello.
Right lads, you both came up with the idea for the blog in a Parisian bar after Scotland crashed out of the 2007 World Cup to Argentina. So what was it about that game that made you think, I know I'd love to spend my spare time writing about how miserable it is to be a Scotland supporter?
I don't think we thought about that at the time because we'd had too much beer. But yeah, I think it was 2007, so it was quite early in the sort of the internet infancy. There weren't, other than the mainstream, the newspapers and things, there weren't websites out there, really. I mean, there were forums and things, but you had to hunt quite hard to find them. So I'd kind of thought that there should be something like that. And I think probably the quality of the ranting that was going on as we stumbled along the streets of Paris, we thought, yeah, well, somebody might listen to this nonsense. I think legend has it that it was a conversation about making Dan Parks the captain. Because he'd been the only one that had sort of come out with any credit from that World Cup campaign. Although I did find I was looking through some of the old articles earlier, and I did find a comment from myself not a comment, but an article about the Calcutta Cup in 2008, where I'd said this blog was to a certain extent founded on the principles of drop Jason White and Simon Taylor until they deserve their places in the team once again type conversation. So we must have been ranting about players not being picked on form, which, to be honest, was something that probably dogged Scotland for more of the 10 years than not.
Yeah, Rory, my recollection was this was wholly based on the power of Dan Parks' ass pat and his high proficiency, the old ass pat that was displayed in 2007. Pretty sure that was the genus of the rant that led to where we are now.
You say as much, I think, Al, in it's the 2008 preview of the Six Nations. You said, I have a fuzzy memory of making a commitment to write regularly and passionately about all things rugby related, and also to produce a tour de force argument vaunting the merits of Dan Parks. But I couldn't find that article. Do you want now this could be a chance. Do you want to go ahead and do that now?
Well, if memory serves me correct, though, Jason White captained us into that World Cup, and I think on that night in Paris, we probably didn't see the leadership that we needed. But Dan Parks was furiously running around, patting backsides left, right, centre, and all over the place to try and G people up. And I'm pretty sure by this point we'd been drinking for, it was a 9 o'clock kickoff, I think, so probably the best part of 12 hours. And at that time, and maybe for several weeks afterwards, Dan Parks seemed like an absolute prime captain, because we knew we weren't very good, but I'd like to have had a captain that was at least enthusiastic. And I think Dan Parks was many things, and enthusiastic probably top amongst them.
Yeah, it actually took you till his retirement to actually write that article.
Yes, indeed. Well, good things come to those who wait, obviously.
And Rory, what's your abiding memory of the 2007 World Cup?
It was probably the first before the blog was founded. There was a little bit of punditry when we were in a pub in Saint Etienne called Le Glasgow, and Andrew Cotter made the mistake of getting me to appear on the radio. He was doing like a live broadcast, and he needed someone to represent the sort of the young fans. He had an old guy who was on like his 5th or 6th World Cup tour, and that was our first one that we'd been to. So I think David Ferguson, who was writing for the Scotsman at the time, was there as well. And after that appearance on the radio, there was then a very large amount of beer drunk, and this was the night before the game. So when the Scotland-Italy game in San Etienne rolled around, I was extremely hungover and slightly fearful of basically existence itself. And the end of that game, where we were basically relying on an Italian to miss a goal kick, which is not too lofty an aim really, but that whether or not he missed that kick was basically going to decide whether or not the rest of our holiday was any good. Because if he missed and we'd gone out, we would have had a trip booked to Paris with no sort of reason to go to Paris. And so that game became about more than sport for the last sort of 10 minutes of that, and certainly waiting for that kick to go over was probably as tense as I've ever been at a rugby game.
And what about you, Al? What's your abiding memory of that World Cup?
Oh, crikey. That was a legendary tour, that one. I mean, Rory's already covered off the night before the Italy game. There was the night after the Italy game where the Scotland team came in to St Etienne afterwards. I remember Mossy, Chris Patterson, very kindly going off to a French policeman, because obviously he doesn't drink, whereas the 2,500 people around him were very much drinking. He went off to a French policeman to get a pen to go and sign autographs, etc. I remember Frank Haddon in a state of disrepair wandering down the street at about 2 a.m. There was Rory getting altitude sickness up on Mont Blanc and Chamonix. There was, and then even just around the Argentina and being in, we were in the Old Alliance in Paris prior to that game. But the night before, it will stick in my mind because it was the night that France knocked out New Zealand in the quarterfinal that year. And I think it was New Zealand they knocked out Rory, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was we were in there's a street I can't remember if it's called in Paris, but it's called like the Eden Park bar, and it was where everyone was watching the rugby, and you pretty much had to get sort of crowd surf your way out of this street. And I just remember all the cars going past with all the horns going. It was a good night to be in Paris. Certainly it was a good 24 hours up until about 5 minutes before Scotland, and I think it was Imhoff killed our hopes in that particular quarter-final.
Yeah, your memories are a lot more positive than mine, because when I look back on this, the only thing I could remember was Craig Smith being carried about 10 metres to just shy of the try line by Luke McAllister in the that game where Frank Haddon chose a second-string Scotland side.
The Grey Blacks.
Yes, the Grey Blacks as they were. I guess it's quite nice to have these memories of a tour that maybe sort of soften the anguish.
Yeah, I think I would recommend it if you haven't gone on an away game following Glasgow or Edinburgh or somebody. It's a great thing to do, and it certainly does. If you have a good time, then it kind of takes away from the pain if your team loses, which over the last 10 years.
No, I was just going to say absolutely. I mean, Rory and I have been lucky enough to have done a couple of tours. We did New Zealand as well, and both those World Cups. The performances weren't exactly great, but performances off the park were pretty legendary, to be honest with you. So you make your own memories as well as what happens on the park, to be honest. But it's the small things. Rory's sitting there saying about the last 5 minutes of that game against Italy, and it was Troncon, I think, that had the kick, and he'd been pretty good form that World Cup, and I think that was actually his last game for Italy that night in St Etienne. But I mean, that 5 minutes, probably like Rory, will live with us, way into my dotage. It may well have knocked off a few years of my dotage as a consequence, Mike.
You mentioned earlier Frank Haddon, Al, and in an early article you referred to him as Frank Bores Haddon, and it's a nickname that didn't really stick. Where did that come from?
Anger, probably. It's probably some deep, dark recess of my soul, I suspect, is where it came from. Yeah, he was an infuriating guy. I mean, you look back, though, in hindsight, that they did what they did. He was vindicated, to use a word Rory might remember from 2007. he was vindicated in terms of his choices around that World Cup. He was castigated for the New Zealand and putting out, a dirt tracker side in that game. But ultimately, he got us out the group. That was his job. Getting to the quarterfinal, I think, was a bit as good as we were realistically expecting to get. The fact that we then got Argentina, who were probably then just on the start of their upturn rather than, maybe when we met them in 2011, that does feel like a missed opportunity. But yeah, I think Haddon kind of shot his level with the players he had at the time. I think he was maybe, you always have high aspirations for them, don't you? Regardless of who's in charge, and you hold them to that, maybe fairly or unfairly.
I was going through the squad for that World Cup, and I was surprised to see that John Barclay was in there because I couldn't remember him playing at the time. Yeah,
I mean, and I think Ross Ford's there as well, and I'm pretty sure I gave him a 6. Just generally.
Yeah, the other thing, Rory, I think one of your early articles is the 2008 Six Nations preview, and you confidently predicted that this would be the end of the era of moral victories and the era of nearly is over. And it's only taken 10 years, but maybe we're nearly there.
Yeah, I would say definitely this year. I would say last year there were no moral victories. There were actual victories or just humiliations. So yeah, we're definitely out of that era now. But it sort of shows the kind of hope you live in as a Scotland fan is every year you're about to turn the corner, and I think we probably saw enough into 2007 to think, yeah, this would be a good team. This would be worth following and seeing what happens and writing about it. And it took us a while. There's not too many of those names still on the go. But
I was going to say it's one of the last time two Berwick players were involved with Scotland, and it's not for me to say that's why they struggled after that. Obviously, that's history. But it's what for you, Al, has been the sort of main changes do you think you've seen in Scotland, say 2007 compared to now?
I think the final, this is not going to come as a surprise to anyone, but I think it's the finally managed to get their arms around professionalism. The club game, the SRU probably, and I think I probably wrote many articles back, around the turn of the decade, 2008, 2009, 2010 sort of period, castigating the SRU and their haplessness. But I actually think from post the 2011 World Cup, they've got their act together, and you think you can start to see that coming through in the club game, certainly coming through in the pro game. There are certain points that you can see where there's been things ticked off. Edinburgh getting to the semi-final of the European Cup, what was it, 2012, 2013, I think was, a bit of a step forward, albeit they weren't able to sustain it. Glasgow's, huge improvement over the last 5 or 6 years has really formed a big basis. And, I think there's a confidence that's come from, certainly from the Glasgow setup, that I think you see flowing through. And we're about 10 years behind where Ireland were. If you think where Ireland went through, and rugby wasn't a huge game in Ireland until they really grabbed professionalism, and then the likes of Leinster and Munster really managed to build up crowds and managed to build up a pool of players that were able to then feed into that national side. And you can see that coming particularly from Glasgow, who have got good crowds, got good number of players coming through, and there is a little bit of a conveyor belt, and there is depth. For the first time we were saying that at the last Six Nations, there is an element of depth coming through, and I think we can see that going forward. So it's just that getting their crap together, really. They sat in their hands for the first 10 years of professionalism, and it is refreshing to see, and it's positive. You just have to hope that they can keep moving things forward in the way that they have done, say, over the last particularly 4 or 5 years.
And Rory, for you, what's been your highlight while working on the blog?
It's tricky to say. I noticed that we were asking a few of the people on Twitter earlier what theirs were, and there was a lot from recent years, and we were having to cast our minds back to find games. For a large portion of them, they came in They came in very small. That would be one that was up there for a lot of people. That was an away win. That was another Dan Parks sort of classic day. Maybe his swan song. But for me, the highlight is finally starting to see Scotland not sort of bottle it in the 22. Looking back through some of the old reports, there was a lot of talk about them throwing the ball about side to side and looking good, but never really getting anywhere. And I think finally we're starting to see Scotland teams with a bit of direction to them, and it's been a pleasure to see them actually kind of playing some rugby. And that, I think, probably has been the last couple of years. I would say finally the emergence of some genuinely world class backs, probably as a back watcher. That would be for me the highlight.
And Al, what's sort of been your highlight over the last 10 years?
I think I've already mentioned earlier on and it was a bit of the first sort of sign of light, but the Edinburgh performance against Toulouse in that as the quarter final of the European Cup. I mean, that was a Toulouse side that was riddled, with absolute world class players. I remember being in the lift and having just an absolute ridiculous man crush on Thierry Dusautois, who at that point was the best player in the world by a country mile. But Edinburgh bossed them that day. I mean, and it was Guy Nubes. He was completely perplexed. I remember him banging furiously on the perspex glass of the coach's box behind us, and to me that was the first time I could remember seeing a Scottish side, and taken away from the national side where we've had good but sometimes fortuitous wins over the likes of South Africa or Australia, but seeing them going out a game they shouldn't have really been in. This was an all-conquering Toulouse side and bossing them, and I think there was an element of confidence that came from that. So to me, that was the start, I think, of the upturn. So I like to think of that probably as the bit that stands out for me.
I think, you mentioned there the Perspex box at Murrayfield, and for me that's been one of the standout performers of the last 10 years. I mean, the punishment that it took under the Andy Robinson reign was something rotten. And then I think, was it Vern Cotter who actually smashed it in the end?
Possibly. I think I may have missed that one.
Yeah, I don't remember it too much extreme violence. I think Andy Robinson probably gave it the hardest time.
Yeah, understand. Well, you wonder whether or not that was down to Andy Robinson, or do you think that was down to the players he had at the time?
Well, yeah,
he was an angry man, though. In fairness,
yeah,
he could have been managing the All Blacks, and I reckon the Perspex would have been getting a hammering anyway. Well,
I wonder what Scotland did for his eyes, because when you look at the pictures of when he's announced as Scotland coach compared to what he looks like now, we've done terrible things for his sight, because his eyes have actually got smaller.
Maybe it was all the bleeding from the eyes that did it. I think my eyes certainly bled at times during his reign as Scotland coach. I think, Rory, you were in Pittodrie for his denouement against Tonga.
I took a photo. I've got a photo of him and Kelly Brown at the press conference. I just thought, I'm sitting in the front row, take a photo. I didn't realise that was going to be probably that was his last appearance as Scotland coach.
I just remember being furious after that game. It's the one time I think I've actually been furious after a Scotland game. Just because it just seemed to I don't know, things seemed to have built to that point, and Scotland seemed to be building, but then it really felt like Robinson really had come to the end of his time, and then of course we've got Scott Johnson.
I have to say, Cameron, though, I'm very impressed. I mean, I spent probably between 2007 and 2017 about furious at the end of about 75% of Scotland matches. So I'm amazed at your calmness, to be honest with you.
Well, I think it's different. What it was I was always accepting at the end of Scotland games, even when we lost, and I think during that sort of past 10-year period of just getting to the end of them and being able to shrug the shoulders and think, oh well, that's the way it goes. We're maybe not that good. But the Tonga game, I think, was the first game where I watched it and thought we should have won this, and there really was no excuse for having not win it. We just didn't want to win it as much as the Tongans. Whereas in other games, you can shrug your shoulder and go, well, we're just Scotland, that's the way things go. I'm not sure I feel that way now, given how much we've improved, as my sort of 0 out of 10 ratings in the Calcutta Cup showed. But I mean, what do you think? I mean, I think Tonga's probably my low in the last 10 years. Rory, what's your low point, do you think?
Probably some of the sort of the poor performances in 2011 at the World Cup. Some of them weren't that great. But I mean, in terms of lows, I think actually probably the Calcutta Cup this year was actually a bit of a crusher because there was that hope around how the team were playing well, and we thought maybe they were gonna at least put up a sort of a challenge. And I think the way that they were kind of thoroughly dismantled was a bit dispiriting, which is interesting really, because if you think about it, it was quite similar last season in Europe when Glasgow went down to Saracens with high hopes, and they were pretty clinically dismantled as well. But everyone thought that was great because Glasgow got into the knockouts and they'd taken a big travelling support, and that was seen as a positive thing. But yeah, the Calcutta Cup, that was a pretty big low. I can remember a few losses against South Africa and things like that were pretty depressing, because there were games that I think with the games against the big teams, the South Africas and the New Zealands, if we got anywhere close to them and then still lost, that those games where Scotland used to drop off in the last sort of 20, 10, even 5 minutes, those were probably quite hard to take, because it made you realise that there was still a fair bit to go in terms of getting the bench depth and the quality of the starting 15 right.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of my highs actually was the game against the All Blacks, where I think it was it Tim Visser's first game at Murrayfield? I think he'd done one game on tour. Where we ran tries in past the All Blacks, and I was out in Leeds watching the game with a friend who isn't into rugby, who could not understand why I was so excited about the fact we lost the game of rugby. But yeah, I ended up in the middle of a German beer tent in Leeds singing "Simply the Best." Just much to the amusement of the people who are with you. You lost that game. It's like, we scored like 3 tries. It's unheard of. Al, what's your low point, do you think?
So last 10 years, I mean, there are a number. I mean, Rory touched on 2011, and it wasn't really the Scotland-England game there, because actually we played really well. It was if my memory serves me correct, it was the Argentina game was pretty horrible in Wellington. But I'm going to actually go way back. And it's probably actually pre-blog, but it is within the decade. So it was 2007, and it was the birth of world-class Phil Gottman, Scotland, Italy at Murrayfield, where world-class Phil managed to, I think, throw 2 intercepts and a charge down within the first 5 to 10 minutes. And it was the only time, and I really like this top, so I've never forgiven him. It was the only time he wore, I think, the white away top with the yellow flashes down the side. And I loved that top, but it was awful. And I was in the Haymarket bar in Edinburgh, and I have never been so livid in my life. I think I may have actually left the pub at halftime in sheer disgust. But yeah, so my low point was at the very start, so it's been a very long, slow but steady climb ever since.
And Roy, did you manage to dig out any? Did you say you'd found a souvenir program from 2007?
I've got the Rugby World Cup yearbook from 2007, which somebody gave me for Christmas. I think probably because I'd been over in France at the tournament.
Was any highlights from that?
Mostly the sort of thing that Scottish rugby fans come to expect, which is not really that much chat about Scotland and mostly dismissive of probably what we thought were Herculean efforts. But on the grand scheme of things, they didn't have that much bearing on the tournament, really.
Yeah, I think one thing I went back was looked at the match report of the Argentina game in The Guardian, in which Gavin Kerr is called Gavin Kerry, and Craig Smith is down as coming on for Ross Ford at hooker. So I don't know who they had at the stadium that day, but I think he probably enjoyed a bit too much of the French hospitality.
Gareth Black, maybe.
Maybe Gareth Black, yes, that mysterious writer from The Scotsman. Anything else in terms of your memories of covering the games, Rory? Any sort of highlights from actually time sort of going to Murrayfield and covering games?
I don't know. I suppose obviously the highlight would be, I don't really remember it, but the highlight was the first time we managed to actually get into a game as members of the media. I wouldn't say we were quite gentlemen of the press, but just for the writing to pay off and actually get us in. That was obviously, that felt like quite a nice reward for the hard work. But getting a chance to shake Vern Cotter's hand after he left and just said that, thanks to him, that was quite good for me. That almost felt like sort of it was the end of a journey almost, because he did so much to kind of restore the credibility, and that felt quite good.
We've got a few highlights from Twitter. We'll put a shout out tonight just to see if any readers or listeners had any memories. There's a couple of shout outs for Duncan Weir's drop goal in Rome.
Mm-hmm. Good shout.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Chunking his Speedos at Dunbar Pool last year. That's a
niche,
yeah.
That's almost a where's Dougie Donnelly?
It is. It doesn't quite count because he doesn't do media work. But yeah, that's a good shout. Who did that? That was from Alan Turner. So thanks for that. That's pretty special. Glasgow's Pro 12 win. We've sort of touched on it. I mean that probably is one of the highlights, I think, of the last 10 years, isn't it, Al?
Oh, yeah, I mean, undoubtedly. I mean, if you think where Scottish, club rugby had been, even up until about 3-4 years before that, it was a bit of a shambles. And the idea of them actually, winning and coming through, and in the way that they did, they had, if memory serves me correct, a pretty epic semi-final, and then it was against Ulster, and then it was obviously Munster in the final, and I think it absolutely beasted them. I just think they'd been showing signs, but actually delivering through. I think it was probably the first time in my lifetime supporting Scottish rugby, certainly as an adult, going, the last sort of 15 years or so, to see a Scottish side go out and just comprehensively do their job so well in such a big occasion. And I think that a lot of the players have picked up the confidence off of the back of that, and the fact is that they're now continuing. They followed up on that. Whilst they've not won, they have followed up by being, they're contenders every year. Last year being a bit of a blip, but the other years they have been contenders, and they look like they're going to be kicking on yet again. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's got to be in the top 3 sort of moments for Scottish rugby in the last decade, I would suggest.
Rory, Al's mentioned there about Glasgow kicking on, and Edinburgh have sort of flirted with Europe, I think, a couple of times in the last 10 years in terms of success, or certainly, I think they got getting through the final and that, like that game against Toulouse that we were talking about earlier, but they've not really been able to sort of maintain it in the same way as Glasgow. And I know we could probably dedicate an entire episode to this, but do you think there's any one reason behind that? Is it that Glasgow have got a better coaching setup? Is it infrastructure? Is it players? What do you think?
I think it probably started with the culture that they put in. I mean, which ironically came from Al Kellock, who'd been playing for Edinburgh. But I think around the time when Al Kellock and Sean Lenine kind of built the culture of that club, and that's been the foundation, which has built the team, which has made a team that is able to play for each other and the wins, which has built the fans and the ability to bring in the cash. And I think that all sort of it all follows on from one thing to the other. It's interesting you said that you couldn't have possibly have planned it any better. But I actually was having a look through the comments, and the first comment on the blog came from Al, back when it was just the two of us talking to each other through the blog.
Well, hang on, wait before you go on. Let me just do something. Hang on, I need to find the jingle. If we're going to move on to this, 2 seconds.
Comment of the week.
Go ahead, carry on.
Okay. So yeah, Al's first ever comment was he was having a rant about Edinburgh. He was having a rant about the prices. Season ticket prices were okay. Price of a single game ticket, considering the quality on show, is shocking. I would go a lot more if I wasn't being asked to shell out a bloody fortune to go to a single game. He also had some beef with the management. I mean, this was just after I think they'd had that thing with the Carruthers brothers and the whole Stephen Larkin signing and then not signing him and all that sort of excitement. Edinburgh is a mess, and I'm not inclined to give my money to the club while it's still a mess. And that was 2007 just, and I think for a lot of people in Edinburgh, maybe not too much has changed since then. A lack of professionalism is killing the Gunners. I mean, I think they are a professional organisation now, but they still have problems with the culture, and that's what I think Richard Cockerell's identified and is trying to fix.
Well, yeah, you look at what happened to Magnus Bradbury the other day, and you wonder if they've now got too much culture.
Yeah, maybe he was looking at the architecture when he tripped. Well,
but it's a lovely place, Edinburgh.
When lying on your back, I think the Cockerells probably, I think Cockerells the first time you get the impression they've got their choices right at the top of the tree, for a good period of time now. They've flitted between coaches, and there's been very little stability at Edinburgh and a very little sense of plan and direction. And you compare that to Glasgow, and Glasgow's, for the last 4 or 5 years, feels very much that they have a direction, a plan. They know where they are trying to get to and what they are trying to achieve, whereas Edinburgh feel like they have been spent the best part of the last decade going through the motions, albeit there have been some high points in there. But you do think Cockerell coming in, he needs to be given, the next year, 2 years even, to actually turn that club around, because it is, I know Rory, you're saying it's a professional organisation, and it is, and they're getting their house in order, but at a playing level it is still not far away from being a shambles, and that needs Cockerell to be given time and resources to structure that club how he sees fit. I think they will reap the benefits from that, but they need a period of stability, because it's not something that's been evident since that post was written, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, I'd pick that out as one of the comments as well. Partly because it was the first proper comment. The first comment. Do you know what the first comment actually was?
Yeah, I saw it earlier. It's something like, "Hello, this is a test comment."
It says, "This is a test comment." Yes. But yeah, I mean, the worry I think I've got about Richard Cockerell is whether or not I don't think it's so much that he won't be given the time. It's whether or not he will give it the time if he doesn't get the resources, or he doesn't feel like he's getting the buy-in from the players and a better offer comes along. That would be the worry, that he might walk.
But I think you could say the same about Dave Rennie at Glasgow. If Dave Rennie came in there and didn't feel like he was being given the resources, or the players weren't buying into it, he doesn't strike me as the sort of person that would need to stick around and push too hard. I mean, that's evidently not the case. But yeah, I think quality coaches, and I know Cockerell's time at Leicester didn't finish particularly great, but he has a proven track record of success, and what he built up at Leicester over a number of years. Somebody of that standing, I think they deserve to be backed, and they deserve to have the backing of the players. You don't have the success that these sorts of people have, Dave Rennie likewise, without having something. And this is where the responsibility falls upon the playing and support staff around these individuals to give them the support to enable them to do their work. And I think, again, Glasgow seem to allow their coaches and support their coaches to do that, and Edinburgh need to do likewise.
I mean, if you were at the SRU and you're writing down your 10-year corporate plan, and we're looking 10 years ahead, what would constitute success for Edinburgh and Glasgow, do you think, in 10 years' time, Rory, if we're sitting here celebrating 20 years of the blog?
I'd say you'd have to say a European winning a European tournament within 10 years. I would say that would probably be a minimum. I would say Edinburgh will probably, you would be hoping, maybe not expecting, but you would be hoping that they would at least make a Pro 12, Pro 14 final in that 10 years.
Or Pro 16, as it might be by that.
Pro 16, yeah. I mean, it could be. Who knows? I mean, maybe Edinburgh it'll be a Super 6. Edinburgh and Glasgow go back to playing the Borders in the Super 6 and Melrose. So maybe it will be after the Pro 6, Pro 17 implodes. So yeah, winning one or other of those tournaments.
Do you know what the first proper comment was that we got from somebody that wasn't either one of you?
No, but I suspect it might have been a guy called Johnny.
It was Johnny,
who seemed to be the only commenter for a while, probably for 6 months or so. He was last seen in 2013. So if you're out there, Johnny, come back. You'll find that there's loads more people to speak to now. I couldn't tell you what the comment was.
It was an article that Al wrote, I think, was it? Yeah, it was your preview, Al, of the France game in 2008. And Johnny said, "I'm with Rory." I think, Rory, you'd left a comment having a go at Al's selection for that game. He said, "Lawson deserves a slot in the 22. There's a reason why Gloucester are number one in the Guinness Premiership." That comment hasn't aged well. And then just finished out, "Other than Walker, why?" I don't know his exclamation mark. Why? Don't understand that. It
must be Nicky Walker.
I'm assuming so. Yeah, it's a very strong team. Maybe I would have Callum on the bench and either Hogg or BT at 8. Interesting that bit that piece, Al, you finished by saying, "Overall an exciting team and a hint of the future. In a previous piece I predicted Scotland to win, and having seen the team I stick by that. I just hope I'm right. Scotland lost 6 points to 27.
Close.
Yeah. and thus began Al's career as a pundit.
Absolutely, and I like to think I've kept that level of quality and success up ever since. I will say though, I think at those points I was doing for the predictions I was doing head, heart, and arse, and I do think that my arse predictions have been pretty close to the mark actually for a fairly consistent period. So you cover your bases.
Yeah, don't predict with your head or your heart, people.
Use your arse.
Any other commenters or comments that stand out for either of you that you can recall?
Not really. I mean, I was having a look, and it was quite interesting to see. I mean, there are far too many comments to go through. There's about 980 pages of comments now to look through. But it's interesting that the first or the last 50 pages of comments were from the first 4 years between 07 and the World Cup in 11, and then there's about 930 pages of comments since 2011. So it was a very lonely first 4 years for us and Johnny, and a couple of others. I mean, obviously, this might be a good point to mention our former colleague Alan Dimmick, who came on board sort of kind of 4 years either side of 2011, I think, probably more, in fact, and he really helped kick the blog on in terms of getting it out there and getting it to the stage where the Scotsman would make articles based on quotes that he'd got in his posts and things like the highlight of any independent media career.
Yeah, I think I joined in 2012. I think so. Not that I'm claiming any responsibility for the comments going up, but
yeah.
I remember once
those golden years.
Yeah, I remember once being quoted in the Scotsman for something I wrote, taking the mick out of the fact that they'd renamed it BT Murrayfield. I think it was my article where I tried to argue it should be called the BT Thunderdome, And for some reason, I was in there as not everybody is happy about this. Cameron Black writing on the Scottish Rugby blog said, and then there was some withering put down I'd put in just as an afterthought on a lunchtime. Yeah. The most commented articles, which I think we can't go that far back in time, Rory, because of our reporting software, but they are my article on Shug Blake and Regulation 8, which that went down a very dark hole very quickly. I think you could pretty much, if you wanted to encapsulate Brexit in an argument about rugby regulations, that's probably a good starting point. There's the 2017 Wales v Scotland player ratings, and then a fairly innocuous article about Ross Ford and Richie Gray being cited during Rugby World Cup. Oh no, Johnny Gray being cited during the last Rugby World Cup.
Yeah.
So it's a fair mix of articles. Is there anything you think that prompts people to comment more, apart from people do get on the high horse about Regulation 8, but apart from that, is there anything that you think that sort of prompts more comments than others?
Well, I mean, it's something we kind of look into. That's why we're not trying to go where the market is, but it's interesting to know what people are, which I think would be clear from looking at the website. But it's interesting to know what people are looking at, and I mean, there's a couple of I think your zero player ratings was just for the Calcutta Cup was a bit of clickbait, because that got shared heaps, and that's why it had so much traffic, because there were loads of quite big rugby accounts sharing it and saying what a disgrace it was.
Yeah, it had an entire Reddit thread dedicated to it, which I'm an old person. I'm over 35, so I don't understand Reddit. I don't
either. No.
Yeah, it just seems to be like message boards that I used to be on back in 2005.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, and the kids have just reinvented it and called it something cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's anything in particular that I think it seems to be controversy. Certainly, it's the one, it's have a pop at the Welsh, or have a pop at the Scottish players for not fronting up against the English, or have a pop at the foreigners, or something. I don't know. I mean, it's the articles where there's a good excuse for an argument seem to attract the comments, and
righteous indignation is usually a good one to get people to their keyboards.
Yeah, and
exactly. Yeah.
I think it is a proven fact, isn't it, that the most trolls we get are Welsh. Why do you think that is, Al?
It's all the mining. It just attracts canaries, to be honest with you.
Most read articles. I'll move on quickly. I don't want my timeline on Twitter getting filled up again. Most read articles, quite similar. We've got the Ford and Gray sighting after the Rugby World Cup game against Samoa, which I think was just everybody was just desperately hand-wringing and waiting for news. I suspect there's just lots of people just sat there clicking refresh on that page in the hope that we would update it. Second was Scotland versus Australia at the quarter final. That's up for a nomination actually in our awards. I think is one of the top moments in the last 10 years. And the third is that's the time I gave everybody 0 in the player ratings. But Al, you came up with the system for player ratings. I think we've talked about it previously. I mean, what
he invented it? That's why he never gets as much of a chance to write, because he's so rich from inventing player ratings.
Player ratings, yeah,
it is.
Every time somebody rates a player, you get commission.
I did that in the 5-star rating for movies, and to be honest, I'm calling in from my yacht, and it's fantastic.
Have you sued the guys from Rotten Tomatoes yet?
I mean, that's going through the court, so there's only so much you can talk about, obviously, but they know their day is coming.
But you sort of came up with the system that we use, in that I think 6 is the average, isn't it? Am I right? 6 is the starting point?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, you start from there and then you tally up or you tally down depending on how they're going. And, I think we have discussed this on a previous podcast, and it does tend to irk people. I think people go, "Oh, 6 is not particularly good," but I mean, everybody goes on the pitch as average, and then they have to actually prove it. I think you see sometimes, and it's not just for rugby. You look at the papers, but you see sometimes as well with football scores and whatnot, and it's the named players, regardless of what they do. That's it. They get scored on their reputation. So I think we've gone with the 6, and then you work your way up or down from there as a way of trying to take reputations out of it, shall we say, and have a bit of an equal balance. Except unless you're Ross Ford, then you don't move up or down. You just stay as a 6 and be happy for it.
Well, you say that. Now, in order to do the awards, I had to go through the player ratings, and Ross Ford wasn't as consistently 6 as we thought. I haven't got them in front of me, but he had quite a few 7s unexpectedly. I don't know who'd given him the 7s. But he
did they not get the memo?
No, maybe not. No, they didn't get the briefing note that you leave the rules. Al's rules start on a 6. Ross Ford cannot score more than this.
I could build it into the. We've got a template. I could build it into that.
Yeah, maybe you could just have hooker Ross Ford 2, even if Fraser Brown's playing. But yeah, he wasn't the most consistent player, which again that'll be on the awards show, which I think is going to go out after this now with scheduling. But yeah, he wasn't actually the most consistent player when you worked it out. And the way that we worked it out was to take out the time I gave everybody 0s, and then just take out everybody that had ever got less than a 6, apart from the 0s. And there were only 2 players that were actually eligible for it, so it was quite interesting. But Rory, can you remember what's the worst score do you think you've ever given? Or have you ever done the player ratings?
I've done them once or twice. I tend to be doing the match report, so I haven't. There's been a few occasions where I've done player ratings, but not very often. I would say probably. I'm trying to think who I would have given a 3, but maybe a 4.
Scott Lawson, game destroyer. Surely he's got a 3 or a 4 somewhere in there.
Match assassin, maybe. Yeah.
Al, is that yours? Scott Lawson, do you think he's probably the person you've scored the lowest?
But Scott, yeah, probably. I mean, did Scott Lawson not almost single-handedly lose the that game against Wales where we were winning about 2 minutes from it, and then he managed to get himself yellow carded for? He came on, and I just remember him being. I blame him, and whether that's fair or not, I blame him. So I'm sure he must have got a stinker.
He wasn't even on the park or something.
Probably.
Unbelievably, he's still turning out for Newcastle Falcons. I saw the other day.
Go on, Scott.
Yes. It's where.
So is Ali Hogg. In fact, most of the players from the first 4 years of this blog are all playing for Newcastle Falcons now.
It's where Scottish rugby careers go to die.
Can you die twice?
I don't know. Well,
that and Worcester.
John Welsh hasn't played since moving there. There you go. It's conclusive proof.
Yep.
Right, we're going to do another. I'm going to try this. This is the new setup, so we're going to try another jingle now. Let's go. It worked. Rory and Al can't hear that, but it did work. It's time for Hands in the Ruck. So, guys, I'm just going to ask you for your biggest hands in the ruck for the past 10 years, Al. What's had its hands in your ruck the most in the last 10 years?
It's a big question, isn't it? What is the thing that has probably gripped my gears? Because that's what I'm going to go to for the last 10 years. Let's say. Can I pick more than a single moment?
You can do, yeah. You can go. You can do more. We've got time.
I'm trying to think. Well, I think there's probably just consistent underperforming at World Cups. I mean, you take the last World Cup out of it, but every World Cup, every Six Nations, just consistently underperforming in tournaments. Because Rory mentioned it, I think, earlier on. We do the autumn internationals. We do well. We invariably turn over, Australia or somebody half decent in the autumn internationals. We all sit and go, "Oh, this is it. Here we go. Here comes the Six Nations," and then it's like the clown car comes out, the doors fall off, wheels go trundling down into the behind the try line, and the optimism generally ends or has generally ended, 5 minutes after the season has started. World Cups, likewise, you think this is going to be great, and then we go out, Invercargill, we struggled to victories against Romania, of which included Mossy falling flat on his backside, trying to convert a try. I just think those years have just ground so many of us down that it's made these brighter moments of the last 18 months all the better. So it's a bit of a holistic grinding my gears. It's the hope that kills you. I'm kind of done with hope. I would quite like to just have sort of realistic expectations that are, pleasant, rather than sort of just consigning myself to defeat. So I think we're there just about. This year is going to be our year at the Six Nations. We're going to beat New Zealand this November, and then we're going to sweep all in front of us and get a Grand Slam come the spring. But I think continuing crushing of my hope would be my grinding of the gears. That probably sums up the last 10 years.
Is that a prediction? Largely. Is that a prediction for Six Nations in the autumn test? Is that a head, heart, or an arse prediction?
That is arse, because because I mean head is that we'll maybe just draw. No, I mean head is that I don't know. I think we're due New Zealand. I have a warm fuzzy feeling about New Zealand this year. I reckon we're going to get a clean sweep.
Careful now, you'll be in the Scotsman tomorrow.
I have been offended many times, Rory, but never to such a level. I shall never darken their doors.
Rory, what has had its hands in your ruck the most in the last 10 years?
It's not really, probably not really anything particularly to do with Scotland. But yeah, just the fact that we were complaining about squint feeds at the scrum and referees being just not very good 10 years ago, and we're still complaining about the referees. The standard of officiating in Pro 14 is on a steady downward curve, even as the Scottish teams are going on an upward curve. So I would say maybe hands in the ruck for the last 10 years would be not being able to produce a decent Scottish referee for a good few years. I mean, we've got a few coming through now who Mike Adamson might kick on. He's starting to get some bigger games. So here's hoping. But refereeing standards in general, and Scottish refereeing in particular.
That's a good call. I'm going to my hands in the ruck is calls for a third pro team. Just let it die. It's not going to happen. There's not the money there. Wales are struggling with 4 regions and a thinly spread player base. It's not going to happen. I think we should just start blocking all comments about it, to be honest.
What if they offered to host it in Berwick?
That would I'm starting a secret campaign to get Berwick to become one of the Super Six, because I think that's what should happen.
Okay.
See, Cam, I would disagree with you just to be contrary, because that was actually when we were discussing earlier on around 10 years from now, what is a sign of success, or what are the signs of success for Scottish rugby? That to me is one of those signs, because we have to get, to my mind, we do have to get a third professional team. It's the only way that we're going to be able to continue to build out the pool, because whilst the Super Six, and I'm sure Berwick will excel come the Super Six.
Hey, the SRU are looking to invest in an English club.
But I do think that's that will only take players to a certain level. They need to have a bridging gap, a bridging step between that and international level, if we're really going to build out the international pool in the way that I think we would like to. And I do think, to me, a third pro team, and it's how you get the investment for that. I agree that's an expensive proposition, but I don't believe in the next 10 years that's, as Scottish rugby grows, you look at the size of the sponsorship deals are now starting to get and re-secure again with the likes of BT, etc. Success begets success, and I think if the national team is able to get that level of success, and Glasgow continue to do it, and Edinburgh finally get their act together, there should be more money coming into the game that not just can be invested into grassroots, but can also be invested into a more competitive professional structure. And I think if we are going to kick on, we need to have that, because you can see how at Ireland, you pointed out to Wales, but you can look at Ireland and look at the competitiveness of the provinces there. Connacht were a joke for many years, but look how they've come on, and but at least they always had another team to allow some of those players to get that experience and that exposure. So I would disagree, sir, with your hands in the ruck, just to be contrary.
Yours is a very pragmatic, well-reasoned argument. I think the issue I have is with the the people that are demanding it now. I think that's more the issue I have.
Yeah.
And I think my worry would, it should be an aspiration. I completely agree with you. I think it is something Scotland should be aiming for in the long term. My worry is, I think that particularly in France and England, there's a lot of clubs paying a lot of money, and who are running up quite huge debts based on the promise of TV money that's there at the minute. But you just think, if that TV money ever dries up, and it did in Super League when Sky just stopped, paying for it, and the likes of Bradford folded and Castleford struggled, and you just don't want to see that happening to in Union either. And I don't think it will happen in Scotland, but I can see. Certainly, I could see clubs in England going under.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of these. It's one of these things. There's a lot of people that want it because they recognise that Scotland perhaps needs it, but I don't think doing it when you need it is going to work, because they did it when they needed it at the start of professionalism and it didn't work. I think the time for a third pro team will be to do it when you can do it, rather than when you need to do it, because we're always going to need to do it. But yeah, they have to wait till the off the back of the success of the other two. So if Glasgow maintain their level of success and Edinburgh get up to that level of success, and the game as a whole is massively popular in Scotland, then there will be the demand for it, and there will be the money for it. Just doing it for the sake of doing it, yeah, I agree, is not particularly sound practice, and has come unstuck in the past.
I've just to round off then. I've asked you predictions for what would look good for Glasgow and Edinburgh in the next 10 years. But what I suppose, what's your head, heart, and arse saying about Scotland in the next 10 years?
I think the near to medium future for all three of those selections looks pretty positive. I think you can look to the next 4 to 5 years, and you look at the age of a good amount of that Scotland side, they will still be playing, and they will still be getting better. And there is, genuinely some world class at it. Certainly, at least one world class player in that starting 15 and Hog. But I would suggest you've got more than that. They are proper international standard. Where do we go after that? I think that's the telling point. It's continuing. I think the success that this team will give us. I mean, there's an outside chance, I would suggest, in the next 4 to 5 years of a Grand Slam. I think that's on the cards, because I think they have all the bits of doing that. I think the pieces are there. You need the luck to go with that. And maybe Tooney will prove to be a bit of a lucky coach. Sometimes you need that. You need things to fall in your lap. It's how they build on, what success does come, is the interesting bit. And it's that longer term future. 10 years from now, for the national side, I think if they have been able to see some of the older guard drop out and have a bit of a conveyor belt of talent coming through, it will mean then that the work that's been done to get them there will be sustainable, and that's where Scotland needs to be. We're never going to have a huge playing pool, so we need to continue to maximise that we have. So I think for us, success will be the occasional Six Nations, semi-final of a World Cup. I don't think it's definitely not beyond us. And then actually beyond that, then again, it's luck of the draw. Could we win the World Cup in 10 years' time? Who knows? Maybe. why not? Aim high. You need the luck of a draw. Probably avoid New Zealand. But after that, there's not many other teams out there that you know, if Scotland continue to progress, you would really be that scared of. So there we go. I want the next 10 years' success should be 3 Grand Slams and a World Cup. and that's probably hard. But
and Rory, what I mean for you, I mean, Al's mentioned Gregor Townsend there. I mean, he's a young coach. Do you think he's still going to be there in 10 years?
I'd be quite surprised. That's a little bit beyond the kind of the career span of most international coaches, possibly with the exception of maybe Gatland, who's been at Wales for a long time.
Possibly to their detriment.
I'd like to see. We've got World Cup in 2019, 2023. So by the time we've put another 10 years on this, that's 3 World Cups. I think Townsend, one of his reasons for wanting the Scotland job now was to work with this generation of players, which is certainly the best generation, the best group of players that we've seen in the last 10 years. And probably, to be honest, going back a fair bit before that, probably until about 1999, in terms of talent. So is 2019 going to be the one, or is he going to stick around maybe to 2023 and have a serious tilt? I mean, some of the backs might be coming towards the end of their tail end of their careers by that point, but some of them will be, some of the forwards, the young forwards now will be hitting their prime. So I think we should have some good years ahead of us, hopefully.
I'll make a prediction for you, Rory. So Townsend will take us through to 2020. Rennie will pick up after him. He'll do 2 years, and then post that it'll be Mike Blair that will be running the team.
Mike Blair in 2023 in Ireland.
Yeah,
Blair 23.
Yeah,
we'll start making the t-shirts now.
Yeah,
that seems as good point as any. It's a fairly low point. As is our want to end it on. So you don't forget to get in touch with us on Twitter at ScottRugbyBlog. Leave some comments on the blog, scottishrugbyblog.co.uk, and we will read those out on the podcast. We've got a Facebook page, which I always forget, but I think it's something like Scottish Rugby Blog or Scott Rugby Blog, Rory.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, just Google it, it'll be fine. We are going to put out a second part to this, which will be our awards show. We've got some very, very special guests on that, so keep an eye out for that. Don't forget to subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us some reviews, or Apple Podcasts, I think as it's called now. We are no longer on SoundCloud, we are now on Audio Boom. If you check out the blog, you can find out details of how to subscribe on other platforms as well. But for now, it's goodbye from me and goodbye from Rory and Al.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
But what happens these days, of course, is that no longer can you just be a broadcaster. Everybody has to have a blog. No matter who you are, how low down the pecking order you may be, you have to have a blog. And